band of merry men and women, Dieter Stoudinger up there in Toronto, and Diane Hansen from beautiful downtown Moon Valley in the Phoenix area, and Eric from South Mountain, as I believe. So we're glad to have you this week again. We always take a shout out for anybody who's new. This is a program for people who are afraid to fly, people who know somebody who's afraid to fly, and anybody who likes to talk airplanes, as we are wont to do from time to time, and will do so tonight for sure. We always like to start with a reminder about our Facebook group called FearlessFlight Birds of a Feather, which is another band of merry folks who are in various stages of overcoming their fear of flying. It's a free group. It's a closed group, but we welcome anybody who's serious about overcoming their fear of flying. It's a great place to meet others, to introduce yourself, to get and give information, and we all participate in it as well from time to time. Tonight, we're going to talk about the stories that you tell yourself, which impact your fear. It impacts everything about being human, but particularly in its relevance to fear of flying. I had a recent coaching experience that I wanted to talk a little bit about, and about how trauma changes brain chemistry. And Eric completed his latest blog. We got it up last week. He's going to give us the highlights of that. And then we got several things in our aviation news roundup about the industry right now, which is in flux like the rest of the world. And then we've got something we call potpourri, if we get to it there, talking about the origins of Bluetooth. So without further ado, let's get into it. And the first thing we wanted to do is, if you're watching us live, or if you are watching the replay, please take a look at this and jot down a quick story about that you tell yourself when you think about something that triggers your fear of flying. An example would be turbulence. A lot of people think that turbulence causes us as pilots to lose control, which simply isn't true. But as long as you tell yourself that story, it's going to cause you to become upset. And the importance of identifying stories is that, one, it helps to start the process to delineate and separate your story from reality. So once you can identify stories, you can identify the triggers, the things that you think about that, and then that can lead to can point you in the direction of what you need to learn, perhaps, or what you need to do in order to work your way through your fear of flying. In this particular coaching session that I had, and I'll talk about that briefly here. And I want to invite any of you out there. Dieter will put a link in there. If you haven't ever taken advantage of the 15-minute coaching session, we really, really encourage you to do that. I just had one this morning, and this particular person does not fly regularly, and they have some plans coming up to fly. And this was a little bit interesting, or a little bit different from the average person, in that this person has, when she was young, I believe about 2 years old, her father died tragically in a private airplane crash. And it happened to be a light twin. And Eric and I, we can talk about light twin accidents. Of all the things that I know I'm reluctant to get into, and probably Eric as well, is someone who's not current in a light twin. And that refers to a general aviation aircraft that has usually piston powered engines, or maybe turbine powered engines, but it's in a smaller airplane. It's not regulated like the airlines are, and you can get into a lot of trouble there, mainly because when you think you have two engines, it may give people a false sense of security. In any event, this is how this woman's father perished. And while she didn't remember, of course, at 2 years old, she didn't have any direct connection to experience from that, but she grew up in that environment. And so what does she do? She marries a pilot, a general aviation pilot, and her son, her second oldest son, is just hell-bent on getting into that in the aviation industry. And again, certainly Eric and I can speak to that, how badly the bug can bite you sometimes. But the interesting thing is she came to me, so she doesn't have the fear that many of you do of flying in an airliner per se, although obviously she does get triggered when things come up in that. But she came to me because she said, what can I do to overcome this? And without, going into a lot of details, I just wanted to talk briefly about that. And so we have a couple of slides here that we pulled over here about the essence of what causes fear of flying and other phobias for that matter. The thing that we wanted to talk about, or that we mentioned both in the book and in our Clear for Takeoff 201, soon to be global online course that Dieter and I are launching or developing and launching right now, is we start out with the fact that we're born to worry, and born to worry, not so much literally in the sense that we're born to worry, but we were born to solve problems, and those problems can become problematic in and of themselves. It's in our DNA. That is the way that we are wired. We are wired to help ourselves come up with strategies and thinking that will survive us in the future. And everything that we worry about gets our attention. So this particular individual, of course, she was kind of, genetically predisposed to worrying about flying because of the particular history that she had with her dad's tragic demise there. And so I wanted to just quickly review a little bit about how the brain works. And it essentially works to look for patterns in our environment. And in doing so, it looks for patterns so that it can form beliefs from that. And beliefs, and from beliefs, of course, come a lot of things, but the primary reason for forming patterns is to look for meaningful things that it can store, particularly the ones that are negative. Now, and there's a particular part of the brain of that, you've heard us talk about it many times, and that's called the amygdala. And the role of the amygdala is to remember significant emotional events from these patterns that we see. Now, it remembers that first kiss, it remembers perhaps a fun birthday party, circumstances around growing up that were happy, but because it is attached to our survival, it has a bias for remembering negative things in the order of about 13 to 1, I've heard, as high as 13 to 1. So when it has a choice of something negative versus something positive, it's going to lean towards the negative because that, it figures, might be more critical to in a situation of survival. And the last thing I want to say about that before we move on is beliefs, how important they are. And that's why when I started with this particular individual, we talked about, I asked her what the story is she tells herself about flying. And she has a very unique story, if you will. And that is, she's worried that in a single engine airplane, if it quits, you're going to go down. And while I can't dispute that, my goal is not to dispute that. My goal is to encourage her, particularly with 2 pilots in her immediate family there, how she would benefit by learning more about the specifics of flying and about operating a single engine airplane versus twin engine airplanes versus airliners, if that makes any sense. But beliefs are key to that. We talk about unpacking beliefs in the course itself, and we're hoping to get that launched, as I said, coming up in the near future. Tonight, so anyway, last thing I want to say about that is, again, I want to make a pitch for a 15-minute coaching session. It's free. Nobody's ever been harmed in one of my 15-minute coaching sessions, and we have a lot of fun, and I think most people get value out of that. So if you are leaning in that way in any way at all, please take a look at that and grab that link and sign yourself up. Now, lots of stuff going on in the aviation industry this week. Some of it's really personal to Diane and Eric and I, having been employees or active employees in there. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to turn it over to Eric real quick. He was talking about some of the unique things about the fluctuation in the staffing, in not only pilots, but in all the other crew positions in the airlines there. And so he wrote a blog here. And if you want, Eric, tell us a little bit about the blog that you launched.
So I'll look at my watch so I don't run over. I'll give you the quick and the dirty. This latest one, we last time I had talked about long-term aircraft storage, because I was interested in researching that as well. I thought that was kind of fascinating. So I titled the last one Pilot Storage, and people are saying, well, what are all the pilots doing while they're not flying? And the airlines, many of them had set up some sort of leave programs where the pilots could be gone for a month or 3 months or 6 months, or in some cases longer. But in the interim, the pilot needs to maintain medical currency and flying currency. And I explained how they go about maintaining flying currency. And the quick and the dirty on that is they have to go back to the company training centers every 90 days or so, get in the simulator and fly the simulator around. So they're completely legal to fire up the airplane and go. Sometime there's going to be a resurgence in demand and things will tick back up, and the airlines will need a decent percentage of its pilots to be current and legal to fly so they can go out to the airport, get the airplane fired up and go. There's no chance that the airline can allow all of its pilots to become non-current at the same time and then try and run them through training all at once. That would be exceedingly expensive and time consuming. So I address that a little bit in this blog about how people retain currency on leave.
We missed a huge opportunity. We could have used your sign, Eric, that said "We'll fly for money," so that if anybody saw someone standing on the corner, they could open their wallets and open their hearts to a unemployed pilot.
Which would have been funny until, last year would have been funny. This year, it's not that funny.
Yeah. So we want to talk a little bit more about kind of extending that, and Diane's going to touch on some things here in a minute. But the next slide, if Dieter wants to put that up, this just came out. I just saw it today, I believe, and this is from an article that talks about how stark is the difference between the number of people who were flying as late as February 23rd. You can see on the far left, going out to the right, that's who's flying today. Fewer than 10% of the travelers that are typically out there as early as February of this year are flying right now. And so push is coming to shove, and the airlines are getting down to that. I think the Triple P loan program covered employees as long as you paid them through September. And I think at the end, there's a lot in the news about the airline industry in particular. And we don't mean to draw the light on us, because there's a lot of people out there that are hurting right now. But the airline employees in particular are about to encounter some huge changes out there. And as you can see from that, and we were talking before we got started here about the contrast. And Diane, you were just saying you want to share with the folks what you were talking about, your experiences. While on the one hand, we're seeing articles in the media that are talking about how we're going to go from too few pilots, for example, to too many. You're not experiencing that right now, right? You just went back on duty this past week.
Right. I was on leave for 12 weeks and started back up, went back on duty on the 28th of June. And when all of this started, my airline and a lot of airlines were offering the employees, flight attendants, VTO, which is voluntary time off, or those kinds of things where you could remove yourself from active flying, from the bidding schedule, and not be paid, but still retain benefits, and which would get you off the books there, so to speak, for that period of time. And I did that specifically so that another flight attendant who needed the income, needed the flying time, could have a spot to do that. Well, we had quite a few flight attendants take advantage of that. And the result of that is that for a continuing period of time, we have flight attendants on VTO. or on leave, that sort of thing. Well, on the 1st of July, my airline and a number of others went back to full capacity. And so they were not blocking seats. They were booking aircraft to the full capacity of that particular airplane. And so it was, as you said, it was kind of a conflict because we had so few flights, so little need for crew members, flight attendants and pilots. And then lots of them went and took leave or VTO. And then the 1st of July, everything started cranking back up again. And we still had people on leave, but more flights. And that combined with a number of flight attendants, reasonably so, now calling out sick. So there's this really interesting conflict juncture right at this time. I think it'll probably all hair over in the end and even out. But as we were talking about before we came on, I'm off for about 5 days right now. And yesterday and just a few minutes ago, I was called by crew support from my airline wanting to know if I could fly a trip on my days off. They're slammed. It's just a real kind of an interesting combination of events right now. And again, it'll all probably smooth out eventually. And then, Ron, as you said, the CARES Act expires on the 30th of September. And all of the airlines which took funds, which was all of them, one of the strings, shall we say, that was attached to that is they could not furlough anybody in that period of time. So none of us could be fired. That expires on the 30th, as I said, of September. And so at that point, depending on what's happening with all of the different companies, all of the different airlines, individuals may wind up being furloughed. Now, there are regulations with regard to what kind of notice, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days notice that individuals have to be given before they get furloughed. So in a few months,
what I think of is kind of like a slinky dog.
Yes.
Yeah. And the shift, you keep seeing the slinky shift between overstaffed to understaffed. And I'm not complaining. The airline industry was a wonderful opportunity to me. I made more money than I should have ever in my life. But even so, I was in one of the most volatile times in industry because the Deregulation Act, which totally deregulated the airlines, was passed in September of 1978, which was my first year in the airlines. I worked for 4 airlines. Every one of them had either gone Chapter 7 or Chapter 11. I never worked for an airline who was not experienced in the process of going through bankruptcy. And Eric can probably say the same thing. And so we've seen this over this last 30 years, perhaps the last 5 years or so, with the really, really strong economy that we had is really the banner time in the last 35 or 40 years of the airlines. But we're going through this again. And of course, this is a different bird. This is not like 9/11. This is not like any of the other economic slowdowns. This is one that's going to take a while to recover. I was reading some articles. It's the most likely traffic right now are businesses for one, who have decided that they need what travel can do to support them, and then the people doing vacations that feel up to that. But Eric, we've joked about Captain Chopped Liver, and so I thought Eric could add his experience, because you were we won't say victim, but you were affected by this whole thing in a way that turned out to be less painful than perhaps some of the pilots are going to be out of a job here. But you want to touch on that one more time?
I changed my name back because I was feeling Catholic guilt and not Catholic. But it was a shocking and swift change how fast the company turned around and drew everything down. And I had planned on taking a 6-month leave, and I go, okay, this will be fine. And the company was able to execute all kinds of fleet plans that they had on the long range burner very, very quickly because of the small amount of operations they were having to maintain. And so my fleet got completely parked all the way across the country, all the bases. And the rub on that was I still had a job, but I was going to have to go to Dallas I was going to have to study and be a miserable person for 5-6 weeks, go to Dallas for 10 weeks, do some initial operating experience for at least a month, and just be gone nonstop. And my wife does have some health issues that you guys know about. And there was no way I could afford that chunk of time to do that right now. So that was I made that decision immediately, and I was just waiting for my heart to catch up with it, which it did. And at the same time, the farther it goes on, the happier I am with the decision. And in a way, in a terrible sort of way, the bad part of your brain, I go, well, it's almost like your big brother gets a Christmas present that you really wanted for Christmas. I wanted to finish as a 777 captain or a 78 captain, go to school, but I did not. It's like your big brother gets a Christmas present you want, but the next day he breaks it anyway, so he doesn't have it, because all of my friends are in such strange flux right now. They don't know when they're training. They don't know when they're done. They don't know where they're going to go. They can't remain current unless they go to sim every 90 days. So they're just a randomized ping pong balls anyway. And one of my buddies who was howling at me not to quit called me the other day and he goes, for the first time, I'm kind of jealous of your situation. And it doesn't make me feel smug. It's just that the old reality and the new reality are so different from each other. But in fact, I was really, really fortunate to be able to have that opportunity to take the leave as long a run as I've had, where there are going to be people on the bottom. Well, Ron and Diane were talking about on midnight September 30, when the restrictions are off, everything will be, the fleet sizing will all be driven by demand. Right. And anybody who says they know what that's going to be doesn't actually know. Nobody knows. It's going to be completely demand driven, and the airlines will rapidly adjust staffing to match the needs. And we're anticipating that there will be furloughs. If they can't achieve everything through voluntary leaves, there'll be furloughs of flight attendants, furloughs of pilots, and there'll be a lot of them. And like Diane said, ultimately, I was so fortunate. But at some point, whoever the last kid in the line is that they were furloughing, the junior kid, one more of them will have a job than wouldn't have had the job if I chose to stay instead of leave. I will have made a position in that regard. So
one of the things that I was going to have you address too, Eric, is that even if you end up being the last pilot in the seniority list, for example, or flight attendant, and you manage to keep your job, it may be that you were living in Phoenix, based in Phoenix, but now all of a sudden your job is out of New York City, right? Or LA or something. So now it not only changes, you go to a lower thing where you don't have the visibility that you had of a schedule, but you have to commute in order to pick up your trips and stuff like that.
That's what we had talked about earlier that was a great analogy with the Slinky. The airlines they're never on cruise control. Never. They're max power, max stop, max power, max reverse, max power. And they do that all the time, like the Slinky. And that this joke is probably older than we are, but the joke was, you're not a real airline pilot unless your company has filed bankruptcy at least once, you've commuted at least once, you've been furloughed at least once, and you've been involved in a merger. You have to have all of that happen to you to be a real airline pilot.
So can we just say that both of you guys are real airline pilots?
I very, very luckily never got furloughed.
Okay, so you're almost a real pilot, is what I'm
hearing. Ron's got them all though, don't you, Ron?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, he's got it all done.
And I think we should. There's a chance. I think because I'm so junior, there's a chance. I think there's a good chance that I'll wind up getting furloughed.
Sure.
Which for me, because my situation is far different than most of the flight attendants out there, it's an okay deal. One of the things that Eric addressed with regard to all of a sudden, if there's a furlough and you go from being number 400 to being the very last one at the bottom, there would be a chance if I didn't get furloughed that I'd be ordered or tasked to be based somewhere else. My airline has right now, they have, I think, 18 bases. And so it's conceivable that I could get based somewhere else. Now, if that happened for me, I will end my aviation career, because Phoenix is my home and my situation is far different than most of the younger kids. But
okay, we may have to black that part of your testimony out here so the airline doesn't see it.
no, I don't think, I think they have other things to worry about.
I think she's just telling them what they would be missing out if they did
Anyway,
that.
but
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah, and one other thing that along with the pilots and the flight attendants that I saw on Facebook, on one of our company's Facebook pages, is even they wound up, there were gate agents and those kinds of individuals who took VTO. And in a couple of the real busy airports, they're struggling there because they need more gate agents. There's more planes. There's a requirement. You guys are flying it and I'm in the back making sure everybody's got their seatbelt buckled. But we don't do anything until the gate agents, customer service agents, get those passengers for us on the plane. And if we don't have enough of them, I mean, the entire system starts really slowing down terribly.
So I'd like to bring this back into our concerns, is your concerns out there. And what does this do to safety? Well, one of the things that the airlines have always maintained is a really phenomenal ability to inject crew members in places where somebody gets sick or somebody can't perform, and that doesn't get compromised. So we've had a long-standing, really the best in the world at training replacements, so that I could be sitting there in the seat and my cohort either got sick or for whatever reason could not perform, and Eric can come along and they can put him in the seat, and we may never have met, and within an hour we're flying along doing the job. And so that's one of the things you can count on. No matter what the status, what the flux is of the workforce in general, you can count that the safety will never be compromised because of compliance and regulatory compliance and traditions and training. We always maintain the higher standards with that. So that's the really good news.
Ron,
throughout.
let me jump in here with a couple of questions and comments. So first of all.
Yeah, I saw that Jim had a comment there, which we'll go back.
So I'm gonna put that up in a second. But one of the questions was from Shally, and so we obviously addressed from an airline perspective, from a pilot and currency perspective, that it's going to be safe. But also part of the question is, will it be safe in terms of, the risk of contracting COVID? So Diane, what could you tell Shally in terms of whether or not she's gonna get on a clean airplane or even airport? So
yeah, and that's an excellent question and a reasonable concern. As we were talking about last Tuesday was my first flight back after being on leave, and we had always been very concerned and diligent as flight attendants, washing hands, that sort of thing. But I was absolutely wonderfully impressed with the manner in which our crews are cleaning the planes, sanitizing them. The pilots are wearing masks. We are wearing masks. Our passengers are required to wear masks. You cannot get into the airport in Phoenix and virtually any airport around the country now without a mask on. And so those precautions are all in place. The airport itself, the maintenance crews there in the airport, and the restrooms and all of those areas are very, very clean. The airplanes, as I said last week, the airplanes, I've never seen them so clean. They are amazing. They're very clean. They're sanitized. Passengers themselves are bringing antiseptic wipes on board, in addition to all of the procedures in place for the crews as we turn the plane from one flight to the next. So in that regard, I would have absolutely no concerns whether or not being on the aircrafts are sanitary or clean and sanitary.
Throughout the years that people would, when you'd have an accident with a particular aircraft type, people would then call me up in droves and say, hey, Ron, I'm flying on a DC-10 next Monday. Should I get on? And I would joke with them and say, only if the pilots get on. So I want to expand that. You know, when something happens like COVID-19, what it does is the first thing it does is it raises our vigilance. And then if you can avoid getting trapped in what this is doing to my personal freedoms and get over that, this is not about your personal freedoms right now. This is about protecting yourself and protecting others. So I would say the safest place to be is being the first one on an airplane that is just turning around to take you somewhere that just landed, because it's never going to be cleaner than what they are now. We've talked about that in past weeks. The second thing is the practices that you adapt in your everyday life are the ones that are going to serve you best when you get on, should you decide to fly. So you want to take precautions. You want to wear a mask, which is really protecting others from you for the most part. But if everybody does that, there's a layer of protection in there. And the other thing is when you touch things, just be mindful of the fact that your most likely way to contract that, I mean, I sound like a medical expert, I'm just repeating what I've heard, but the most likely way is from touch and then touching a part of your eyes or your nose that would make you more vulnerable. So good practices personally that you can practice every day, go in the grocery store or wherever you have to go right now. But the airlines themselves is probably a safer place. And it still makes sense. If you don't have to fly, you're probably better off, like everything else, staying at home for right now. You know, and it's a great time to work on your fear of flying. Hang out with us, because by the time you get the world is ready to go flying again, you'll be ahead of the curve.
So here's a question from Susan. I don't want to forget that because she's
our Susan from Boston.
Yes, Susan.
Okay. You got a surprise. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So Susan asked. So that's all good. So, you know, the pilots, the flight attendants, the planes are all safe. What about air traffic control? Like, are they falling under the same regulations? Are they, you know, is there going to be a lot of turnover? Is there going to be a lot of new people, you know, because the old people cost more? And so that kind of stuff. Are they regulated separately? Who
you want to talk about that, Eric? You want to talk about that?
I was going to say, until the very last question, I was going to say the answer to that is yes. Absolutely. But they are regulated separately. That's true, but they have their own sets of standards, currency. It's a very, very tightly controlled deal. But as demand for aircraft, as aircraft movement, total aircraft movement decreases, controller demand decreases. I don't know what kind of leave options, that sort of thing they had as part of the government, but I suspect it's pretty good. At the same time, they would have had to maintain currency in Oklahoma City, where they do their simulations and training and all that kind of thing, so that when demand comes back up, they can get swept back up the same way as we did. But
they are governed by the same federal aviation regulations that we are. A different part of the book, but the same regulatory compliance. So as you can imagine, if the traffic at a given airport drops, it might reduce the staffing required to have people on duty at those times. But again, whether they're on duty, whether they're laid off for a period of time or whatever, they have to meet the same stringent training requirements that we do as operating the airplane. So same kinds of things. And what you can count on is again, the training that's required, the qualifications that they have in general, and the regulatory compliance to stay current. So there you go.
Ron,
okay.
Do you want to finish it up with, here, I just took a
I got to thank Susan in person here,
all right,
because she must think that I really need a lot of help, because she sent me a really nice mask here. I got a box just hours ago, and I'm sure she was trying to time it for the show. So way to go, Susan, you did it. And in that box, I don't know what she's heard about my personal hygiene habits, but she gave me 2 bottles of hand sanitizer.
Maybe she flew, when she flew with you, she sat next to you.
Yeah, there you go. So then I got a couple little mini bottles that I can take with me, but she really knows me, because the main booty here was something called Sconza chocolates. It's called limoncello chocolate almonds. If you've not ever had these, don't start. It will lead to nothing but your own personal destruction. And the first thing I got to do, Susan, is I got to put them in the fridge because I think they're about 85 degrees in here because they sat outside for a few in the FedEx truck or whatever. But anyway, thank you so much. And you're a great sport. And we love having you as one of our followers here. So, okay, Jim, you want to put that up with Jim? Jim was talking about his story. So we'll use this to emphasize the importance of stories. And Jim says in here, before cleared for takeoff in 2017, the story I told myself was it's dangerous to fly. The turbulence will cause the plane to plummet. That's Eric and I have a real thing about the word plummet. Airplanes do not plummet. But that's what you see in the news a lot, and it's going to crash. Since then, I've learned that turbulence is not dangerous, and it's in flying, it's the safest way to travel. A message emphasized on my drive home the following day when a car nearly crashed into me on the freeway. We say that a lot. The riskiest part of flying is driving to and from the airport. But this is an example of a story, and I want to reemphasize because I kind of passed over that before. The stories that you tell yourselves are really critical. And if you are traumatized, like my coaching student was with an event, whether you experienced it firsthand or whether it came to you in stories and lore in the family, it can change your brain chemistry for life. Because that part of the brain, the amygdala we talk about, where these stories can be perpetrated and originated, it stays for life. The one thing we know about trauma is that it never really fully goes away. What you can do is to deal with it either by education or by doing some mindfulness activities. And we encourage and teach both of those in Fearless Flight. So trauma can change your brain chemistry for life. And we want you to take advantage of everything that we have here at Fearless Flight, particularly the free 15-minute coaching sessions, if you will. So, okay. I don't know. This is just my personal thing. The Bluetooth thing. We talked about it a little bit last week. I just happened to listen to a podcast. I love podcasts. And they talked about where does the term Bluetooth come from? And it's kind of got Scandinavian origins. So maybe with my last name that appealed to me too. But it came from a ruler. I think he was either Swedish or Norwegian. No, I think he was Swedish. And that his name was Harald, Harald, Bluetooth. And allegedly, the part of that story that goes on that was he either had a dead tooth or terrible diet, and his teeth, some part of his teeth were blue. And so that became his real life name. Well, the story behind that, there was a guy named Jim Kardash who was working for, let's see, let me find through this. Anyway, this guy was working for Intel, I believe, and he was working, they were developing wireless technology, which came to be called Bluetooth. And this is for laptops at Intel. And he was reading a book at the time called The Long Ships, which was about a historical adventure novel about the Vikings. But the historical part was it had King Harold Bluetooth in it. And what he did was he united these tribes ultimately and put them all together. So that was the legacy behind that. And so they used this, I heard, originally as just a code name while they were developing it, thinking that they would come up with a better name for branding down the road. But by the time they got to that, they said, hey, why not? It works. This guy united all these people, and we're uniting all these multiple technologies so that computers can talk to ourselves. And there you have it. That's the history of Bluetooth and why we call it that way. The logo, if you look up at the top of your computer right now, if you're sitting there like I am, you'll see the combination or the little logo that we use for Bluetooth, the Bluetooth symbol, is the Norse letters for H and B put together. And that's how you get that little kind of a squashed asterisk in there. So see, there's no limit to the things that you can learn here at Fearless Flight.
To imagine that a nerd, especially on the cutting edge of the technology, did that amount of historical research is just mind-numbing.
And you and I, we're really cool guys, Eric, but we're not going to be known like this guy was, right? I mean, as soon as they throw the last shovel of dirt on me, that's it. But this guy's going to live on forever.
His brain was working on several channels.
But
at
you
one
know
time,
what?
no doubt about that.
I have to say that, and I don't know, you can put that in the comments, but to be quite honest, I'm sure that even in his death, this guy gets a lot of what do you say, that unfavorable thoughts being sent to him, because I have never had good experiences with Bluetooth. So
Yeah. He may be rolling over in his grave being something else when people curse their Bluetooth isn't working. So anyway.
No, I just look. We've got Nielsen, Larson, and Hansen. This is a pretty scary
We
company.
do have the Danes are well represented here.
Good
So
Lord, yes. Well, I just married into it, but yeah.
all right. Well, what can I say? That's another episode in the can for us here at Fearless Flight. We really do appreciate you all tuning in. It makes it fun to do this, and that's really ultimately what we're all about. So thanks to Diane and Dieter and Eric again, and we'll see you here next week for the next episode of Fearless Flight Live. Bye-bye, everybody, and stay safe.